Now we're on the phase Amid Vedas. We're going to see that Rav Ashi, because he had such a conflict between two statements of Rav Yehuda in two different brises, he's going to reinterpret the authorship and attribute the authorship to brisa not to Rav Yehuda as we have it in our text, but rather to Rav Yosef. So now let's see what exactly was the stira in two conflicting statements of Rav Yehuda that bothered the mind of Rav Ashi. Well, Rav Yehuda, how can you tell, like we saw in the rice that we quoted on Daf Beis Amid, that according to Rav Yehuda Bisman Azeh Holo Mistaklim Ba Ein Korno Sel Bisman, Rav Yehuda insists that in our time we read it on the 14th and the 15th to Raminu. What are you going to do with the following Mishnah on Daf Hey? The Mishnah quotes Rav Yehuda Emasai. I agree that we'll read the Megillah earlier than the 14th and the 15th, but when? Only b'makom shenichnasim b'sheni u'b'chamish. Only when the members of the Kfarim come into the big cities on Mondays and Thursdays. So we're going to make a special heter, a special dispensation for them to read the Megillah early. But aval b'makom shenichnasim b'sheni u'b'chamishi, they don't, in any event, the townspeople are not coming into the big cities on Monday and Thursday. They didn't call bismana. Let them read it in its proper time. We have no reason to give them a dispensation if they're not traveling into the cities on Mondays and Thursdays. There's no advantage to read the Megillah on a on that day of Yom HaKnisa if there is no Yom HaKnisa. But in any event, we see clearly that Makom Shenichnasim B'Sheni B'Chamim, when the townspeople do come in on Mondays, Thursdays, however, Karina, we will read the Megillah on those days, I mean, this statement of Rabbi Yehuda is referring to Zman Hazeh. We have no reason to suspect that the Mishnah is Dafka B'Zman Shetikun B'Tikuno. So therefore, Rav Ashi was so hard pressed by this era in two brises got the of Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, Mukim le brisa to Rabbi Yossi for Rabbi Yehuda. He says no, the brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda; it's Rabbi Yossi for Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says Bishun de Kashale the Rabbi Yehuda Mukim le brisa to Rabbi Yossi for Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, that's not fair game. I mean, I understand, I appreciate, and shall I say commensurate with you because you have a steer in two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, but therefore you rewrite the brisa, and it's not Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. And where it says Rabbi Ashi Shmiel le de Ika de Tani le ki Rabbi Yehuda, Ika de Tani le ki Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. He had a Kabbalah, Rav Ashi, that it could be the brisa is quoting Rabbi Yehuda, it could be the brisa is quoting Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Yehuda. There were two Lashonos. So it wasn't that he had a definite text to rely on, that it's Rabbi Yehuda who's being quoted. Umi the Kashle, Rabbi Yehuda. So man the Tani le Rabbi Yehuda lav dafka, man the Tani le Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda dafka. He basically rejected, because he had no other choice, that tradition that would attribute the brisa to Rabbi Yehuda. Instead, in its place, he would accept and embrace the tradition that this brisa should be attributed to Rabbi Yosef. Mishnah says that Minoni, what's the source in the Megillah for reading the Megillah on Tesvav for the Krach in the walled cities? Once again, we're going to see a pasuk in Megillah Perek Tes. Those who live in the unwalled cities, they will read the Megillah on the 14th. In the present, that the Megillah specifies the present, the open cities, will read on the 14th, is I derive from it by implication that Bukaf B'chamichas. So the Gemara immediately objects. The aim of Praza Barbasar Bukafim Klal Lo. This is a pella of a Gemara one. The Gemara says that those who live in walled cities are not obligated in Purim at all. The Pnei Yoshua tries to explain this by saying that they weren't in danger. So the whole institution and establishment of Purim was because Hashem took us out and saved us, but they weren't in danger because they lived in walled cities. In any event, the Gemara is raising such a habit that maybe the Bnei Akrachim just don't read the Megillah at all. Follow Klalo. So the Gemara says, for Lav Yisrael, I don't get it. You're taking a segment of Jewish people because they live in walled cities, and you're removing them from the great mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, the Od, and furthermore, Mehodu Vad Kush Ksid. At the beginning of the Megillah, it speaks about Mehodu Vad Kush, as if to say the entire Megillah addresses all the areas and the Jewish communities, Mehodu Vad Kush, and therefore the Yontif of Purim was accepted even by the provinces of Achashverosh. So the Gemara asks, the Ema Prozim Be'arbasar, Ukafim Barbasar Ubechamishasar. Maybe what the Megillah is indicating with regard to the Krachim that they have to read on the 15th, it's not enough that they read on the 14th, they have to add another day, a second Kriya on the 15th. Lios osim es yom arbasa lechodesh hadar es yom chamishasar bo b'chol shana. You're asking me why would I have a havamina that with regard to the krachim they have to read it twice on 2 different days? And the answer is because the Megillah itself seems to indicate that Purim is a 2-day holiday, and we should observe it both on the 14th and the 15th. Arbasar v'yom chamishas. Gemara says, if it would have said, I would agree with you if it would have said, Eis Yom Arbasa v'Chamishas, then you're absolutely correct. In other words, if you leave out the S, the second S of Es Yom, and instead you have just above, then you're right, it might be a 2-day continuous holiday. Now it says Es Yom Arbasa, period. And then it says Ve'es Yom Chamishasa. As far as the mitzvah Megillah, that means Asa A'es Upas. The word Ace is a divider, and it divides the beginning and the end. Telling you that there are 2 groups of people, 2 dates, and we match them up. And Hani, those who live in the unwalled cities, Barbas, Hani, those who lived in a walled city, b'chamishas. So the Gemara asks, "V'yema prozim bar beisar, mukafim ibo bar beisar, iboy b'chamishas." Maybe the Megillah is giving the Bnei Akrachim a choice. They could either join up with the city, the open walled cities on the 14th, or they can have their own separate Megillah on the 15th. Again, as far as unwalled, that's explicit in the Megillah, that they have to read it on the 14th, but as far as Rachim, perhaps they can read it on either the 14th or the 15th. Omer Krov is Manehem, Zmano Shalzeh, Lo Zmano Shalzeh. Each one gets a separate time. For this segment of the population, it's on the 14th, and in the walled cities, it's on the 15th. The Gemara suggests V'yema v'tleisa. Maybe the walled cities should read it on the 13th. And the Gemara answers Shushan. Just like in the case of Shushan, they would certainly celebrate Purim on the 15th, because that's when they rested from the war against their enemies. So too, Bnei Akrachim are like the Shushanim, and they should read it on the 15th. The Gemara says, while it's true that you could derive from that possible, it's Yom Arbos, it's Yom Chamishas, that we're talking about the mitzvahs of Purim in general, Sudas Purim, for example. And that should take place either on the 14th or in the case of walled cities on the 15th. But there's no indication here that we're talking about Zechira. That means about reading the Megillah. We have a hekesh between Asiya and Zechira. And just like the Asiya is on the 14th and the 15th, respectively, so too the reading of the Megillah. Masnisin below Kiaitana. Now, Mishnah is against the following Tana and the Bryce. Tanya will into the Bryce. You're right that we derive that the walled cities, this Hekesh of Zechir and Asiya, will read the Megillah on the 15th. But walled, at what time in history were they walled? According to Rabbi Shimon Karcha, they were walled back at the time of Pharaoh. I mean, that's intuitive. Right? My time of the Rabbi Shimon Karcha. Shushan. Let's go back to Shushan. Mashushan Mukefes Chomi Mosa Hashverosh, Korim B'chamichas. Afkol Shemukefes Chomi Hashverosh, Korim B'chamichas. So now, if the derivation of Mukafos Chomo is from Shushan, that's the Pasuk Shushan, then it makes sense that we should go back to, when we talk about a walled city, we're going back to the time of Achashverosh. Tana Didan, my time, why does our Tana reject this concept? That it's the time of Achashverosh that determines the walled city, but rather it's the time of Yoshua. Again, as we said before, that's counterintuitive. Like, why go back to Yoshua? We should go back to Achashverosh. Is Yolif Prozi? Our town had Xer Shama. Sivhacha here in Megillah Esther, it says, once again, the 9th chapter, Prozi, Levad, Meoria Prozi, Alkena Yudima Prozi. And later on, at the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, we have Ksiv Chosam Levad Meoria Prozi Harbe Meot. And this pasuk is talking about Kibush Ha'amim before the people crossed the Yarden and went into Eretz Yisrael by Moshe and Yoshua. Allah Moshe Yoshua. Afkani Moshe Yoshua bin Nun. So when the Jewish people at the time Moshe had been together with Yoshua, they conquered various nations before they crossed the border. Then at that time, we're talking about Orea Prozos that are Mukafos Chom. And from what time? From the time of Yoshua ben Nun. And now we have Xer Shava, the Alkena Yudim Prozim with regard to Kriyas HaMegillah. Bishlema, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karchloma Ketana Didan, to Leslie Prozi. He didn't have a Masorah on this Xer Shava, Prozi. He had to find another source. And as it turns out, his source drew him to that position that we're talking about. Office Chomim Mimos Yeshua ben Nun. Elatana Didan, my time below Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Karch. Why not just say that it all depends upon whether there was a wall at the time of Achashverosh? So the Gemara asks, my time, what kind of question you ask? But Islay Prozi from the Tersha Prozi, he determined we're talking about walled cities from the time of Yoshua. Hachikam, Gemara now reformulates its question. Ela Shushan the of the Kiman. My question relates to Shushan. Why? Because you're talking about Mimos Yoshua. Well, I have news for you. Shushan is local prosim, the local mukaf. Right? It's not like a prozim, because Shushan is certainly not a prozim, it's a kroch, it's a krach, it has an ear mukefes choma. But on the other hand, it's not a walled city, because you're telling me it has to be walled back in the time of Yeshua. Shushan is not like the walled city of Mos Yeshua. Amarava, Yamelekidi, Shani, Shushan, Hol Benasibones. So Shushan gets a different status because that's where the miracle took place. So therefore, those who live in Shushan, who were given an extra day back at the time to go and defeat the enemies, so they didn't rest until the 15th. And therefore, that sets the precedent that Shushan would celebrate Purim on the 15th, even though it's not your classic case of a mukaf. Who says that it all depends on Yimot Chrochim Mukafas Chol Yos Yeshua. We understand these extra psukim of Medina, Umedina, Ve'ir, Le'ir. Again in Megilla, Parak S. So why does it have to say Medina, Lemedina, Ir, Le'ir, Medina, Ledina? Is l'chayk ben mukafes choma mimos Yeshua benunu mukafes choma mimos achashveros. Our Tana is going to derive from the extra Medina that if you have an ir mukafes choma mimos achashveros, it's not mukafes choma. It doesn't read the Megillah on the 15th. Ir ve'ir nami l'chalk ben shushan l'shar ayoros. Right, that Shushan will celebrate Purim on the 15th, even though it's a classic unwalled city of Prazi, and it should be celebrating on the 14th. We're going to celebrate on the 15th because that's where the miracle took place, on the 15th. El Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, to him it's Mimos, it's Mukefetz Homot Sachashvero, it's Bichlem Medina, that I can accept. L'chalek bein Mukafet Chomo Mimos Achashveros, Li'ein Mukafet Chomo Mimos Achashveros. I understand Medina is justified to differentiate between cities that were walled at the time of Achashverosh and cities that were not walled at the time of Achashverosh. But Le'ir, my us. What is Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha going to do with the extra words ir le'ir? Because we just finished saying that the city that was walled at the time of Achashverosh is on the 15th. So it has the exact identical status as Shushan. You did a fast one. So as if to say, according to our Tana, who holds me Mos Yeshua, it works out well. No. Why do you need the drasha of Medina? Came in this like Prazi, Medina Lama. We have the Xeris Shalom, and that's going to teach us only cities that were walled at the time of Yeshua. What do I need Medina? Ella, you have no choice but to assume that the drasha would be us. That we're going to need Medina for a separate drasha. Yom Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Krach, V'chol HaSamachlo, V'chol HaNirlo, Nidon Kekrach. We have two categories in the expanded definition of a krach, and they will read it on the 15th. One is Samach and one is Nir. So the Gemara is going to analyze what is considered a Samach. What is Samach? How close to a walled city does it have to be in order to qualify as Samach? And therefore read the Megillah on the 15th. Hadkama. Rabbi Yomi Tema Rabbi Chia bar Abba Kemach Mechamson Litveria, and that is Mil. Mil is 2,000 amos. So that's the distance which, if it's within that distance, it's not beyond the 2,000 amos. then it's considered part of the craft. They'll read on the 50. Yeah. So lema meal. Why did Rabbi Yirmiyah say bichamson litveria? Let's just tell me a meal. How come Ashkelon the shiur the meal? Tamahavi kamson. In other words, if you don't know how much a meal is, if you know how far it is from these two cities, one city to the other, Chamson to Tveria, you'll figure out how much a meal is. So this is all called sum. What about Mira? So it seems that if you are in a city that's walled, Mimos Yeshua, and you can stand and see another city there, then that also gives that other city approximate status, and therefore it's part of the Kriyas HaMegillah, the Krochim on the 15th. Again, there are a lot of details about Nira that we'll get to later on in the set. Another statement in that same tradition has nothing to do with our Masechet per se. Matzapach Tzofim Amora. Matzapach was established by the Tzofim, by the Nevi'im. Now, what is Matzapach? Matzapach, Mem Nun Sadi Pei Kuf. I should say Chaf. These are letters that have a different shape at the end of a word. So, for example, if you have a Mem Nun Sadi Pei or Chaf in the middle of the word, that's a regular shape. But if it's at the end of a word, what we call a mem sofit, for example, then it has a different shape. And that new shape was established by the Nevi'im. So the Gemara immediately asks, V'tizra b'ksiv ela hamitzvot she'ein novi rashoy l'chadish dover me'ata. That any halachic decision or ruling cannot be introduced by a Navi. A Navi doesn't have the authority of Mechadish Tova. And now you're telling me that the form of letters changed in Matzapah by virtue of the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im can't change the halacha. And when you introduce new forms of letters, then you are changing the halacha. It's a Chidush Dover Me'ata. Furthermore, for Ha'amar of Chizda, Mem v'samach shebeluchos, Mem and the samach in the luchas habris, we're on Daf Gimel, b'nes how you owned it. Okay, there was a miracle that they would stand, and this proves that the letters at the end were already in use back at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. You can't tell me it was instituted by the Nevi'im. I have here a diagram. See if you can see here. You see it? That's the Mem and the Sama. And it says, B'nes hayu owned. He says here, Osiel Shabaluchos hayu chakukos mitzad mitzad. So they're engraved from one side to the other. So the inner side of the Mem, let's say it's a Mem stuma, or for example, the Tzamach, then the middle part was Omed Bi'av. It was chiseled out both sides. So that's a great miracle, that it's suspended in midair. Anyway, we see clearly that the Mem stuma already existed in the Luchos. How could Rabbi Yirmiyah therefore say that it was established by the Tzofim? And the Gemara answers in Enochinami, the letters of Matzapach, Mi'avi Hava, they existed already before the Nevi'im, but V'lo Aviyadi Hey v'yemtze teva ve'hei v'sof teva. So we knew there are two tsuros of a mem, for example, matzapach. One is psuchos, one is stumos. We weren't sure if they should be put in which one should be put in the middle of a word and which at the end of it. Here's where the Nevi'im stepped up to the plate and they clarified and established that psuchim be'emtze teva and stumim b'sof teva. And very quickly the Gemara asks, sof. In other words, even if the Nevi'im are coming to be kofeh, which letters belong in the middle of the word and which at the end of the word, that also is a chiddush tova. It's not within the authority of the Nevi'im. Ella shechachum v'chazu v'yistu. That initially we were absolutely certain where the psuchos belong and where the stumos belong. Right, the psuchos in the middle of a word and the stumos at the end of it. But we forgot about that. Somehow we lost the tradition over the course of time. And chazru v'yistum, and then they went back and they reestablished. So it wasn't the new takana. They weren't changing the halacha. They were just clarifying. It's like when we say teku, that the tishbi yataris, he still clarifies. He's not going to ask in shilas as a novi. Again, there's a long discussion here about how we could have forgotten exactly which, over the course of time, which mem, stuma, psucha goes to which part of the word in the middle or the end. That's a pella. Okay, then, wishing you a great day.